I never planned to show up uninvited. That wasn't my style, never had been. But when your daughter stops returning your calls in November, sends your birthday card back with a scribbled "return to sender," and then lets slip to your sister that maybe this year it's just us and Wilbur's side, well, something shifts in you. Thanksgiving morning came cold and bitter, 15 degrees and falling, sky the color of old nickel. I sat in my truck for nearly an hour parked outside the Speedway on Route 44, sipping stale gas station coffee and trying to talk myself out of doing what I already knew I'd do. I wasn't dressed for a confrontation, just boots, jeans, a fleece over my thermal. The kind of thing you wear when you're fixing a shed or checking the pipes, not walking into a family dinner where you've been quietly erased. But I'd bought the gifts. I'd bought the damn turkey. And I'd be damned if I was going to eat it alone. I rolled up to Leona's place just past 2:15. Same cul-de-sac in Maple Glen. Same over-decorated porch with every holiday decoration from Halloween to Christmas crammed into one garish display. Plastic pumpkins. Santa on a Harley. A bless this mess doormat I'd given her years ago. Still there, though somehow dirtier. Then I saw him. Amos, my grandson, sitting on the front steps, knees pulled up to his chest. No coat, no gloves. Just a t-shirt and those damn basketball shorts he wore all summer, now soaked and stiff from the snow that had started to fall. I killed the engine, flung open the door, and ran across the driveway, boots slipping on the ice. He didn't even look up. Amos? His shoulders were shaking. But not from tears, from cold. His lips were a dull blue. I dropped to one knee and threw my coat over his back. "What the hell are you doing out here? Where's your coat?" "I'm not allowed inside," he whispered, voice hoarse and broken. I looked toward the house, glowing from within. You could hear them in there. Forks clinking, laughter rising and falling like a damn sitcom. I stood up, walked to the door. And I didn't knock. I kicked it, hard. The wood cracked near the latch. The laughter died. And when the door swung open, every eye at the table turned to me like I was some ghost from a Christmas carol. 6 words. That's all I said. "Why is my grandson outside freezing?" You'd have thought I pulled a weapon. Leona stood up so fast her wineglass toppled. Wilbur, slick-haired, smug, all bulk and bourbon, just stared. His fork halfway to his mouth. No one moved. No one spoke. 4 hours, I said, voice shaking. That's how long he's been out there. I timed it. Amos appeared behind me, wrapped in my coat like a child in a blanket fort, his face pale, his eyes tired. "Get in the truck," I said without looking back. "We're going home." Leona opened her mouth, probably to scold, to explain, to minimize. But I was already turning, already guiding Amos back through the cold. That moment, that damn quiet, was the crack, the beginning of the reckoning, and none of them saw what was coming next. But justice has its seasons, and winter had only just begun. Before we continue, do me one small favor. Subscribe to the channel and drop a quick comment. What time is it where you're listening right now? The truck heater was already going full blast when I got Amos inside. I wrapped one of the emergency blankets from behind the seat around him and reached into the glove box for the hand warmers I kept for fishing trips. He didn't protest. He just sat there, quiet and hollow-eyed, like an animal too used to being hurt to flinch anymore. I put the truck in reverse, tires crunching over the thin sheet of ice that coated the driveway, and didn't look back at the house. If they wanted to call the cops on me for kidnapping, they'd have to catch me first. But Amos was 18, legally an adult. They had no claim on him anymore, not after today. I glanced over as we turned onto Miller. "How long has this been going on?" He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window at the snowfall, like he could erase the last few hours by watching the world turn white. "Since Mom married Wilbur," he finally said, voice dry as kindling. First it was just chores, then it was rules, then it was this. This, I repeated, gripping the wheel tighter. You mean the freezing outside part? Or the garage punishment? Or locking you in the basement? He flinched. I shouldn't have said it like that. But I was trying to get the words past the fire in my throat. He calls it man training, Amos muttered. Says he's toughening me up. Says I need it because I never had a real dad. The urge to turn the truck around and beat Wilbur within an inch of his smug, self-righteous life was strong, but that's not how justice works. That's not how Martha raised me, and that sure as hell wasn't going to help Amos now. Where's your phone? I asked. He shook his head. Wilbur took it last week, said I was texting too much. I haven't had it since Tuesday. Jesus. We drove in silence for a while after that. Past frozen mailboxes and driveways half cleared of snow. A golden retriever barked from a porch. A neighbor waved, probably assuming I was just another grandfather driving his grandson home from practice. Grandpa, Amos said suddenly, voice trembling, do you think I'm weak? The question sucker punched me. What? Do you think he's right? That I need discipline? That I'm too soft? I pulled over right then and there, the truck shuddering as it came to a stop on the side of the road near Hillview Baptist Church. Amos, I said, turning to face him. You sat outside for 4 hours in freezing weather because you were too afraid to knock on your own door. You kept quiet about being abused because you didn't want to make things harder for your mom. You tried to fix dinner, and when it didn't go right, you took punishment like it was something you earned. I paused, watching the streetlights flicker on. That's not weakness, son. That's loyalty. That's resilience. And that man's idea of discipline is just an excuse to control people weaker than him. He didn't cry, not exactly, but I could see it in the way his eyes filled, how he blinked them clear like he'd been holding that question in his throat for years. I reached into the back seat, grabbed the other blanket, and draped it over his legs. You're not soft, Amos, I said, but I'll tell you what you are. You're free. He nodded slowly. When we pulled into my driveway, the porch light was already on. I'd forgotten I left it that way this morning. Maybe out of habit, maybe hope. Martha used to call it her lighthouse. Said it helped us find our way back home on the stormy days. Tonight it did just that. I helped Amos inside, got him a hot shower and one of my old sweatshirts. He was taller than me now. When had that happened? But still thin. His shoulder blades looked sharp enough to slice paper. I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Something warm, familiar. And we ate it in the living room with our plates balanced on knees, watching a rerun of some cooking show Martha used to like. He laughed once, at some awful souffle collapse, and I realized it was the first real laugh I'd heard from him in months. After he went to bed, the guest room now officially his, I sat on the edge of the couch and listened to the wind howl against the windows, the kind of wind that might have killed him today. And I made a decision. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Wilbur thought he'd won, that he'd broken the boy into obedience, silence, gratitude. But what he didn't understand, what none of them did, was that I'd been broken once, too, years ago. And I'd stitched myself back together with something stronger than pride, truth, and I was about to bury them in it. I got up, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and pulled out the old manila folder I kept in the side drawer, insurance papers, birth certificates, old emails from Leona when she used to trust me. I added a new section. Wrote on the tab with a marker, Justice, Amos. Then I sat back and let the rage do what it needed to do. This wasn't just about one holiday gone wrong. This was war, and the first shot had already been fired. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of the noise or the cold. The house was quiet and warm, the kind of warmth that came from gas heat and thick walls and the comfort of knowing no one could hurt you here. But my mind wouldn't shut off. Not with Amos asleep in the next room, safe for the first time in who knows how long, and the image of Wilbur's smug face burned into the back of my eyelids like a scar. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, a yellow legal pad in front of me, half a dozen pens scattered around, and the manila folder lying open like a case file. This wasn't just going to be emotional revenge. That wasn't enough. No, I wanted documentation. Receipts. Something so clean, so irrefutable, that not even Leona could spin her way out of it. Because the truth? She was as guilty as he was. I wrote 3 names on the top of the page: Wilbur, Leona, Amos. Then under each, a timeline. I went back, as far as I could remember, charting the first signs, the subtle ones, the ones I brushed off. July 3rd, 2022. Amos had called and said he couldn't come fishing because he had chores. He sounded tired. August. He showed up to the 4th of July barbecue with a bruise under his eye, said it was pickup basketball. September. Leona told me not to call after 7 because Amos needs less screen time. I listed every one, every phone call cut short, every excuse. At 2:17 a.m., I found myself flipping back through the old photos Martha had kept in the sideboard drawer. Amos at 12, holding up a trout nearly as big as his torso. Us at the county fair, faces sticky from funnel cake. Christmas 3 years ago, the last one I was invited to, where he gave me that handmade wooden keychain that said, "Best Grandpa Ever." And then the years went dark. No more photos, no more holidays, just distance, and now bruises. I called a friend the next morning, Jim Franklin, a lawyer I used to play cards with before Martha got sick. He owed me a favor or two. "You got a second to talk?" I asked. "For you always," Jim said. "What's going on?" I told him everything. Not the emotional part, just the facts. The boy, the freezing, the punishments, the isolation. Jim didn't interrupt. He just listened. The way real men do when they know something serious is at stake. Finally he said, "That boy want to file a report?" He's scared. He's also 18, which means Wilbur has no legal control over him anymore. And if we can get corroboration, we've got something real. Witnesses? Not yet, I said, but I've got memories, notes, and I've got Leona's silence. That's something, Jim said. Let me dig around. Might be able to get someone from Family Services to talk off the record. If nothing else, we can build pressure. Make Wilbur sweat. Good. Let him sweat. Amos didn't ask questions when he came downstairs that morning and found me on the phone, folders spread across the kitchen table like blueprints for battle. He just poured himself cereal and sat down across from me, quiet. After a while, he said, "You're really doing all this for me?" I looked at him. "I'm doing it for both of us, son. You don't get to treat people like trash and walk away whistling." He gave a half smile. "Wilbur always said you were just some washed-up factory guy who couldn't let go of the past." "Good," I said. "Then he won't see this coming." That night, I went to the attic, dug out an old hard drive I hadn't touched since the year Martha passed. It took me 2 hours and 3 adapters to get the damn thing working. But when it finally booted, there it was. Emails from Leona, all the way back to when she met Wilbur. Some of it was innocent. Some of it wasn't. One email from 6 months after their wedding stood out. "Dad, I know you worry about how strict Wilbur is, but this is just how he was raised. He believes boys need strong discipline. And honestly, Amos has been kind of lazy lately. It's probably good for him. Please don't interfere." I saved that one. Printed it. Highlighted the line. "It's probably good for him." Then another. This one to Martha. "Sometimes I feel like Wilbur pushes Amos too hard. He gets angry fast. I don't know what to do. Please don't tell Dad. He'll just make it worse." So she knew. She always knew. And now I had proof. Amos helped me sort through it all. At first he was hesitant. Like maybe this was going too far. But then he found a photo on his own phone. One I didn't know existed. Him, 2 winters ago, sleeping in the back of my truck. Time stamped, Christmas Eve, 11:53 p.m. "I took it," he said, voice flat, to remind myself I wasn't crazy, that it really happened. We added that too. By the time we were done, the manila folder had doubled in thickness. Not just a list of grievances anymore, it was a damn dossier. We stood in the kitchen, the weight of it between us. "Are you sure?" I asked. He nodded. "I want him to know I remember everything." I tucked the folder under my arm. "Then it's time to go see a man about some justice." We pulled out of the driveway just after dusk. The porch light was still on behind us. A lighthouse, a warning, and a promise. We drove in silence most of the way to town. The heater hummed, and the roads glistened from a thin crust of ice that hadn't yet melted from last night's storm. Amos watched the fields go by, his reflection faint in the passenger window. The kid looked older than 18 this morning, like someone who'd already lived too many winters. I didn't say much. I wanted to, but there was something about the quiet that felt right. The kind of silence where you're building up pressure for something that can't be undone. Jim's law office sat above a pharmacy on Main, the same one where Martha used to buy her arthritis cream. The stairs creaked like memory, every step a reminder that time was catching up to us all. When we walked in, Jim was already standing by his desk, reading glasses on, sleeves rolled up. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. "You got what I asked for?" I laid the manila folder down like a stack of cards I'd been waiting years to play. Amos stood close to me, clutching the strap of his backpack like he needed to hold on to something solid. Jim started flipping through the pages. He didn't rush it. He had that lawyer's patience, the kind that makes silence work for you. After a few minutes, he looked up. "This is strong," he said. "The emails help, the timestamp photo's powerful, but what seals it is your daughter's acknowledgement. She knew." "She looked away," I said. "Same thing." "Worse," Jim said. "It's complicity." He leaned back in his chair. "We can go two ways with this. Option 1, criminal complaint. Child endangerment, maybe assault depending on the bruising and duration. He's got exposure if the DA takes it seriously. Option 2, social fallout. We use documentation, testimony, and a little strategic communication. Civil pressure, not legal." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning we make Wilbur the pariah he deserves to be. We send those emails to the right inboxes. His employer, his church board, the homeowners association he probably loves being part of. I know his type. He lives for appearances." Amos shifted in his chair. "He'll come after us if you do that." Jim nodded. "Probably. But it won't matter. Men like Wilbur only have power when people believe their version of the story. Take that away, and they deflate fast." I looked at Amos. "What do you want to do?" He hesitated. "I don't want him arrested, Grandpa. I just want him to stop, to know he can't do this to anyone again." Jim leaned forward. "Then we go public, not legal. A quiet campaign of truth. No lies. Just the facts. You'd be surprised how fast the world turns on bullies once the curtain's pulled back." He was right. Martha used to say the same thing. Darkness hates witnesses. Jim made copies of everything, scanned the digital files, and told me he'd handle distribution. "Leave the chessboard to me, Dennis," he said. "You've done your part." On the drive home, Amos stared out the window again. The town rolled by, the diner, the post office, the old movie theater that still showed matinees for $5. Every piece of it reminded me of the years I'd spent thinking we were all fine. "You okay, kid?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quietly. Then after a beat, "I just keep waiting to feel guilty." "For what?" "For telling the truth." I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "That feeling passes." When we got home, I saw the blinking light on my answering machine. One new message. Nobody leaves messages anymore, so I knew it wasn't good. I hit play. "Dad," Leona's voice came through, brittle and trembling. "I heard from Wilbur's boss that someone's been spreading stories." "What are you doing?" He could lose his job. Please stop this before it gets worse. You don't understand what you're... Click. She'd hung up before finishing. Or maybe Wilbur had walked in mid-call. Either way, the fear in her voice wasn't for herself. It was for him. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd written out those notes the night before. Amos was upstairs unpacking, humming softly to himself, a low, tuneless sound that filled the house like oxygen. I thought about the years I'd spent believing that patience would fix everything, that if I stayed calm, family would come around, that time would smooth the edges of cruelty. But some things don't get better with time. They rot. That afternoon, Jim called back. "It's already moving," he said. Wilbur's employer confirmed receipt. The HR manager's furious. Apparently there were previous complaints. 2 parents from his church group replied to my email within an hour. One said they'd noticed bruises on Amos at Sunday service last spring but didn't want to get involved. They're willing to make statements now. Good, I said. Let them talk. Dennis, there's more. His brother, name's Frank, left me a voicemail. Said he's been cut off from the family for years because he called Wilbur out on his temper. Offered to testify if needed. The corner of my mouth twitched upward. Sounds like the dam's breaking. By evening, the phone started ringing again. Leona, 2 of her friends, 1 unknown number I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was already out of my hands, moving faster than any of us could stop it. At 9, Amos came downstairs in pajamas, hair damp from his shower. He looked like a kid again, like someone who'd finally been allowed to breathe. "Can I stay here a while?" he asked. "At least till I figure out what's next." "You can stay as long as you need," I said. "This is your home." He smiled, small but real. Then he hesitated at the kitchen doorway. "Grandpa, what did you say to them when you kicked down the door?" I met his eyes. 6 words, he nodded. "Yeah, but which ones?" I leaned back in my chair, the memory sharp as glass. "Why is my grandson outside freezing?" Amos exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping his throat. "Good line." "Wasn't a line," I said. "It was the truth." He went upstairs then, the floor creaking under his steps. I sat there in the kitchen a while longer, listening to the old house settle around me. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. Inside, for the first time in years, it finally felt like peace was coming. But peace always has a price. And I had a feeling Wilbur wasn't done paying. It took exactly 48 hours for the first crack to appear in Wilbur's kingdom. I didn't have to look for it. The news came to me. Friday morning, just after sunrise, my phone buzzed with a text from Jim. He's been suspended. Church leadership meeting tonight. HR investigating. I stared at the message, the screen lighting my kitchen like a small holy fire. Outside, the snow had melted into slush, and the roads gleamed under a thin wash of sun. It felt symbolic somehow, filth showing through, truth surfacing. When Amos came down for breakfast, I handed him the phone. He read the text once, then again, the corner of his mouth twitching in something that wasn't quite a smile. "So it's really happening," he said. "It's just the beginning." He poured himself coffee, black, no sugar, the way I drank it, and we sat in companionable silence. The boy had changed fast in 3 days. Color was coming back to his face. The timid hunch was easing from his shoulders. You could tell he was still fragile, though. Every sudden sound made him tense. Years of conditioning don't dissolve overnight. At 9, the doorbell rang. My stomach dropped. Through the glass, I saw a familiar shape. Leona. Wrapped in a wool coat too thin for the weather, hair perfect as always. The sight of her knocked the wind out of me. She looked so much like her mother that for a moment I almost forgot why I was angry. Almost. Amos froze halfway up the stairs. "Do you want me to—" "Stay where you are," I said, and opened the door. She started talking before I could even greet her. "Dad, please." "We have to stop this." I stepped aside just enough for her to enter, but not enough to make it comfortable. Coffee's fresh if you want some. I'm not here for coffee. Then maybe start by telling me what you are here for. She hesitated, fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Wilbur's been suspended from his job. Someone sent those emails to his company, to the pastor, to... Someone? I interrupted. You think this is random? Her eyes filled fast. Dad, you're ruining us. Do you know what they're saying about me? About Amos? I crossed my arms. They're saying the truth. She sank onto the couch, shaking her head. You don't understand what it's like to live with him. If I push too hard, he... She stopped, swallowed. He has a temper. I know, I said quietly. I've seen the results. Her eyes darted toward the hallway. Is Amos here? He's safe. She exhaled, a fragile sound that carried both relief and shame. He won't even take my calls. I've tried. Maybe start by asking yourself why. She pressed her hands to her face, makeup smudging. I thought I was doing the right thing, Dad. Keeping the peace. If I'd fought him, it would have been worse for everyone. No, Leona, it was worse for him. You just didn't have to see it. The clock ticked loud in the quiet room. Finally, she looked up. What do you want from me? I want you to tell the truth, I said. To the church, to his employer, to whoever asks. No more pretending, no more saving face. Her voice cracked. You want me to destroy my husband? No, I said. He already did that himself. You're just sweeping up the pieces. She covered her face again, shaking silently. I let her sit with it. For years I'd been the one sitting quietly while she and Wilbur dictated the rules. Not anymore. When she finally left, she hugged me. Unexpectedly, awkwardly, the way a drowning person grabs the first solid thing they can reach. I never stopped loving you, Dad, she whispered. I know, I said. But love doesn't count much if it hides from daylight. After she drove off, the house felt heavy but clean. Amos came down the stairs, cautious. How bad was it? Bad, I said, but maybe necessary. He nodded, then sat at the table across from me. What happens to him now? Whatever truth decides, I said. It's out of our hands. That evening, the local paper ran a story. Local contractor under investigation for domestic abuse allegations. Wilbur Green, 46 of Maple Grove, has been placed on administrative leave pending review of multiple complaints regarding abusive behavior toward a family member. I read it twice, then folded the paper neatly and slid it into the folder marked Justice, Amos. No triumph, no gloating, just the quiet gravity of inevitability. Around midnight, I woke to a sound outside. Not loud, just steady. A car idling on the street. I pulled back the curtain. Headlights sat motionless in the snow for a long moment before backing away down the block. Amos's light flicked on upstairs. He was awake too. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come, because I knew that sound. That was Wilbur's truck, and justice rarely goes down without a fight. The next morning, I checked the driveway first thing. Nothing. No tire marks. No footprints. Just the crusted over snow from the night before, and the faint impression where my truck had been parked. Wilbur hadn't come to talk. He hadn't come for a scene. He came to remind us he was still watching. Amos noticed too. He came downstairs already dressed, shoes on, a hoodie pulled over his head like armor. I didn't say anything about the truck. Neither did he. But we both knew. Over eggs and toast we laid out a plan. Not one built on revenge. That part was already unfolding without us. But something more useful. Structure. Routine. A map for the road back to normal. Or whatever normal was supposed to be after what he'd lived through. First things first, I said, sipping my coffee. We're calling the college, getting your records moved, setting up the spring schedule. He hesitated. You sure you want me here that long? I looked at him. I didn't rescue you so you could hover like a house guest. This is your home." He nodded, but I could tell he was still measuring his welcome by the cup. He'd lived in Wilbur's world too long, where comfort came with strings and affection turned to punishment the minute you stepped out of line. The admissions officer at Dayton University was kind and professional. Said she'd flagged Amos's account after his midterm evaluations came in. "We've seen signs he's been struggling," she said, "but his professors speak highly of his potential." "Struggling," Amos muttered after we hung up. "That's a polite word for trying to survive." Later that afternoon, I took him to the barber shop. Just a trim. He wanted to keep the sides tight, but let the top grow a little. The barber, an old friend named Mitch, didn't say much when I introduced Amos. Just nodded once, said, "Glad to see you again, kid," even though I wasn't sure they'd ever met. Small towns are like that. You can vanish for years and still come back to a nod that says, "You still matter here." After the cut, we stopped by the hardware store. Amos needed new gloves, new boots. His old pair had been soaked through when I found him on those steps. They were still in a trash bag in the garage, covered in salt and shame. "You pick," I told him. "Whatever fits." He didn't argue, but he didn't reach for the best ones either. Settled on a middle-of-the-road pair, cheap soles, thin lining. I handed him the good ones anyway. "No more bargain bin life," I said. "Not under my roof." That night, as we sat in the living room watching an old Western, one of those long, dusty ones Martha used to love, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I didn't answer. 30 seconds later, a voicemail. Amos looked over, tense. "Him?" "Probably." I let it sit until the movie ended. Then, after Amos went up to bed, I played it. The voice was familiar. Not quite Wilbur's, but close. Frank, his brother. "Dennis, this is Frank Green. I heard what happened. I want to help. Wilbur's been like this since we were kids. Worse now. People have been afraid to say it for years, but now that the lid's off, call me back if you want my statement. I'm not afraid of him anymore. And I'm damn tired of watching good people suffer because of him." I saved the message. Another nail in the coffin of Wilbur's good guy image. Another piece of the puzzle Amos would need if things ever went legal. But more than that, it was a reminder. Abusers don't just hurt the people closest to them. They spread rot. They poison whole trees, whole families. And sometimes it takes a generation to cut out the infection. That night, I left the porch light on again. Not just for Amos, but for me. Martha used to say that grief carves a hollow in your chest big enough to hold new beginnings. I never understood it until now. The next morning, Jim called. "You sitting down?" he asked. Standing over the sink? That good enough? Wilbur's employer didn't just suspend him. They fired him. Quietly. No press release, but he's out. Clean break. I didn't answer right away. My fingers tightened on the edge of the sink. "You still there?" Jim asked. "Yeah," I said. Just thinking about what that means. "It means your grandson's safer. It means the truth is winning." I hung up and walked out to the garage. The cold bit at my face, but it didn't bother me. I pulled the trash bag from the corner, the one with Amos's soaked clothes from Thanksgiving, and I drove it down to the landfill myself. No sense keeping relics of suffering. Let the past rot where it belongs. Later, I caught Amos at the kitchen table, sketching something in a notebook. He closed it when I walked in. "What's that?" he shrugged. "Just drawing." I sat across from him. Waited. He opened it again, hesitantly, showed me a rough sketch of a small shelter, like a bus stop, only nicer. Enclosed, heated, a bench inside. "Something for kids who get kicked out," he said, "even just for a night." I stared at it. "You gonna build it?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "Someday." I nodded. "I'll help." He smiled, and it wasn't guarded this time. Wasn't half hope, half sorrow. It was the smile of a kid who finally believed he could make things, that he was allowed to. And Wilbur? Well, I had a feeling he was just getting started with his fall. But I wasn't going to watch every turn of the spiral. Some stories don't need you at the end. Some just need you to light the fuse, walk away, and make a better world from the ashes. Saturday afternoon, Amos went to meet a friend from school. Jake, the guitar kid he'd mentioned a few times. I offered to drive him, but he shook his head. I need to do this on my own, he said, slipping his new boots on, laces still stiff. Fair enough, I told him, and handed him $20. In case you stop for coffee. Thanks, Grandpa. He said it easy now, not like before, when it felt like he was testing the word out of habit. It meant something again. After he left, I sat down with a pen and a stack of unopened mail. Most of it was junk. A few bills, a retirement account update that reminded me I was still years behind where I wanted to be. And then I saw it. A pale blue envelope, handwritten address. No return name, just green residence. Leona's handwriting. I thought about tossing it, but something about the way she'd written Dad, small, slanted, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to, made me open it. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, cream-colored, heavy. Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you right now, and maybe I never did. I've spent the last few days watching my life unravel and realizing that it was never built on anything solid to begin with. You were right about Wilbur, about the way he chips at people until they don't know who they are anymore. I let him do that to me. I let him do it to Amos. No excuses, no justifications. I just let it happen. He's gone now. His things are out of the house. We had a hearing on the restraining order yesterday. The judge granted it. Temporary for now, but the lawyer says we'll get the permanent one next month. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. I've started therapy. Amos doesn't need to know that. Not unless he wants to. But if he ever wants to talk, or even just yell at me, I'll be here. And if not, I'll still be here. Thank you for saving him when I couldn't, or wouldn't. I'm sorry it took me so long to stop lying to myself. Love, Leona. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it into the manila folder. It didn't change everything, but it mattered. A few hours later, I was out back clearing the gutters when I saw Wilbur's truck drive past again. Slow, deliberate. He didn't stop this time. Just a slow roll up the street, like a man too proud to admit defeat, but smart enough not to test his luck. I watched him from the roof until he was gone. Then I went back to clearing out pine needles, my hands steady. That night, Amos came home with red cheeks and wind-blown hair. How was it? Good, he said. Jake's parents asked if I was okay. I told them the truth. I looked up from my paper. That a first? Yeah, he said. Felt weird, but good. Then he pulled something from his backpack, a folded flyer. There's a talent show at the rec center next month. Jake and I are thinking of performing. You know, just a couple of songs. Acoustic stuff. You'll do great, I said, already picturing Martha clapping from her seat. You want me to come? Of course I want you to come, he laughed. Front row, loudest clapper. You got it. We ate leftover meatloaf and watched an old war movie after. Something black and white. Amos actually stayed awake through the whole thing this time. Said the ending surprised him. Heroes don't always win, he said as the credits rolled, but sometimes the bad guys don't either. That's the trick, I said. You just got to keep moving forward. He went to bed early, and I stayed up doing what I always do when the house gets quiet. Thinking. I thought about the voicemail Frank left. About the way Wilbur's circle had shrunk almost overnight. Word gets around in a town like ours. He'd lost his job. His seat on the church board. 2 old buddies I knew from the hardware store had stopped answering his calls. Even Cody from the Rotary Club, one of Wilbur's cronies, had apparently distanced himself. There's a strange kind of justice in that. Not a trial, not a cell, but a slow, public loss of standing, like watching a man become invisible. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not really. Because men like Wilbur don't just fade quietly. They simmer, they wait, and sometimes they explode. Wilbur came back on a Wednesday. Not the quiet drive-by kind of comeback. Not the headlights in the snow, keep you on your heels kind of thing he'd been doing. This time, he parked, walked up the drive, knocked on my front door like a man expecting an apology. I was in the garage organizing screws, a little project Martha used to call fussing, like I needed to stay busy to feel useful. I heard the knock, clear and sharp. Amos was upstairs, headphones on, practicing chords. He didn't hear a thing. When I opened the door, Wilbur stood there in a black windbreaker, fists stuffed in the pockets, face raw and wind-burned. He looked smaller, not physically, just deflated. "Dennis," he said, voice low, too controlled. I didn't answer, just watched him. He glanced past me, trying to see inside. "I just want to talk. You've got 10 seconds, I said. "Talk." He blinked. Didn't expect that. Men like him need an audience, a stage, a chance to monologue their version of the world. Cut that out, and they're stuck staring into silence. Finally, he said, "You've ruined my life." That made me laugh. "You did that yourself." He stepped closer. "Do you know what it's like to wake up and have no job, no family, no one answering your calls?" I didn't blink. "You're describing Amos." He flinched, just slightly, then covered it with a sneer. "You think you've won something, don't you? Turned my wife against me, poisoned my name, made me out to be some monster." "You made yourself the monster," I said. "I just held up the mirror." His nostrils flared. "This isn't over." "Yeah," I said. "It is." He took another step forward. Too close. I didn't back up. "You think this town's on your side? You think they care about some old man playing hero? People forget, Dennis. They move on. And when they do..." He didn't finish. I leaned in, just enough to let him know I wasn't afraid. "You're not scaring me, Wilbur. You're embarrassing yourself. And if you ever show up here again, I'll have you arrested. There's already a restraining order. I'll get one for myself if I need to." He sneered. "You don't have the guts. You're confusing me with the boy you used to shove around, and the woman you silenced for 3 years. His jaw tensed, his eyes twitched. "Get off my porch," I said. He stood there another second too long, trying to make up for all the ground he'd lost. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. He turned, walked down the steps, and got in his truck. Tires spun for a second on the icy gravel. Then he was gone. I stood there long after he disappeared. Not because I was afraid, because I wasn't, and that felt new. Amos came downstairs an hour later. I didn't tell him what happened. Not because I wanted to protect him, but because I knew he already felt enough guilt over things he didn't cause. Instead, I asked him if he wanted to go fishing this weekend. "Yeah," he said. "But we using worms or lures?" "Whatever gets you out of the house," I said. "We drove up to Lake Mary on Sunday. Cold water, half-frozen shore. We didn't catch much. One smallmouth between us, tossed back. But that wasn't the point. We built a fire, cooked hot dogs on a wire rack I rigged from the truck, and sat on folding chairs like kings of a forgotten kingdom." "You know," Amos said, staring into the flame, "I used to pretend the garage was a tent, like I was camping. Made it feel less like punishment." "Yeah." We sat with that a while. Then he said, "Do you think people can really change?" "I think people can choose to," I said. "Doesn't mean they will." He nodded. "I think Mom wants to. She'll need time and space and honesty. She said she started therapy. That's a start." We packed up just after sunset. The sky was glowing peach over the tree line, and the wind had picked up enough to bite. Back at home, he played guitar while I cooked. When we sat down to eat, just meatloaf and mashed potatoes, nothing fancy, he said, "You know that feeling when something big is over but your body hasn't caught up?" "Yeah," I said. "Like when a storm ends, but you're still listening for thunder." "Exactly." He poked at his food. "I keep waiting for him to show up again, for everything to go back to how it was. It won't." "You sure?" "I'm sure," I said, "because I won't let it." And for the first time since that cold Thanksgiving day, I saw him believe it. I didn't sleep much that night. Again. Not from fear this time, just thinking. Wilbur's truck hadn't come by in days, but still, I left the porch light on. Not for him, for Amos, for the kid who used to pretend the garage was a campsite, and for the man he was becoming now that he finally had a real home. The first snowmelt came early that year. By mid-February, the sidewalks had gone from white to gray to that wet, slushy mess you can never quite walk through without soaking your socks. But the sunlight stayed longer each day, just enough to start believing winter wouldn't last forever. It matched the mood inside our house. Not joyful, not fixed, but thawing. A slow undoing of the cold that had settled over our lives. Amos was making routines now. He woke up without prompting, cooked breakfast twice a week, helped with the woodpile out back. Small things. Quiet things. But every one of them felt like a thread he was stitching back into a life he'd almost lost. Leona called once a week. No pressure, just updates. Sometimes Amos took the calls. Sometimes he let them ring. I didn't ask. I figured healing was personal, and nothing kills it faster than someone watching over your shoulder asking, "So how'd that feel?" But I did notice that every time he did pick up, the calls lasted longer. The silence after was quieter. One Tuesday morning, he came down with his coat zipped and his eyes bright. "Jake's dad got me an interview," he said. "Part-time at the auto shop, Saturdays." I nodded. "You want it?" "Yeah, I think I do." "Then you've got a ride." The shop was out by Route 12. Same block where I bought my first transmission for the Buick in '87. Funny how life loops like that. When we pulled up, Amos hesitated before getting out. "Do I tell them everything?" he asked. "About, you know." "You tell them you're ready to work," I said. "The rest is your story, no one else's." He got the job. That Saturday he came home with grease on his hands and a look I hadn't seen in a long time. Pride. Not the performative kind, but the real thing. The quiet pride that comes from earning something without apology. That night, I went through some old boxes in the attic. Martha's stuff. Photographs, recipes, those lists she used to keep. Books to read with Amos. Fall projects. What matters. At the bottom of one box, I found a letter in her handwriting. It was addressed to me, never sealed. Probably one of the many notes she wrote when her health started to fade, just in case. I sat in the attic with a flashlight balanced on my knee and read, "Dennis, if you're reading this, it means something hard already happened. Maybe something you couldn't stop. I hope it's not about Leona. I've worried about her, about that new man. But if it is, and if you had to step in, just remember what I always told you. You don't need to save everyone. You just need to show up when it counts. And if it's Amos, well, then I know you already did the right thing. That boy has your stubborn streak. But he's got a good heart. I saw it in him when he was 7 and gave his sandwich to that stray dog, even though he was starving after school. Be patient with him. With Leona, too, if you can. Sometimes good people get stuck in bad stories because they're too scared to write new ones. You've always been the one who could say, "Enough. Use that." And don't let guilt convince you it's not your place. If you're reading this, then you've already done something brave. Keep going. Love, M. I folded it gently, the edges worn soft with time, and put it into the same manila folder that held everything else. The emails, the photos, the timeline. It didn't feel like evidence anymore. It felt like closure. A few days later, Leona came by. She didn't call ahead. Just showed up mid-afternoon while Amos was still at the shop. I found her on the porch, hands wrapped around a travel mug, staring out at the trees behind my house like they held answers. "I won't come in if you don't want me to," she said. "You can come in." She stepped over the threshold like it meant something. And maybe it did. We sat in the living room, the fire going, coffee brewing, and for a while, we didn't talk. Then she said, "He's changing." "I know. I watched him this weekend, at church. He talked to the pastor like a grown man, not like someone asking permission. Because he's not." She looked down at her hands. No rings. Her fingers bare now, nervous. "I stayed with Wilbur for too long," she said. "I let him teach me how small I had to be to survive. Then I let him teach my son the same thing. You're not the first. I don't want to be the last." She pulled something from her coat. Not a letter, not a note. A form. Adoption reversal. Legal paperwork she'd started filing to remove Wilbur from Amos's records, to make the break official. "It's the only thing I can undo," she said. I nodded. Then, for the first time in a long time, she cried. Not performative, not manipulative, just quiet, exhausted grief for the years she'd lost and the things she'd allowed. I didn't say much, just sat beside her like Martha used to sit beside me when I didn't know how to speak. When she left, Amos was just pulling in. They passed each other on the driveway. He didn't hug her, but he didn't walk past either. They stood there talking. 5 minutes. 10. Then he came in, tossed his coat on the chair and said, "She's really doing it, cutting him out. Legally." "Good," I said. He nodded, then looked at me with something new in his eyes. "Do you think people ever actually change, or do they just get tired of lying?" "Little of both." He sat down, pulled out his notebook. The one he used for his shelter sketch. This time the sketch had new additions. A rain barrel, a second bench, solar lights. He was planning now, not just dreaming. "What if it was mobile?" he asked. "Like a trailer we could take to neighborhoods where kids sleep rough." "You thinking of building it?" "Thinking of pitching it to the city." I looked at him. This boy, this man, had once sat on cold concrete for 4 hours because someone told him he deserved it. Now he was designing shelters. You don't measure justice in jail time. Not always. Sometimes you measure it in blueprints. And healing? That starts with warm rooms, hot food, people who look you in the eye and call you by your name. I didn't expect the city to say yes. That's the truth. I figured Amos would send his proposal, a couple sketches, a mission statement, a rough idea for a mobile warming shelter, and it'd get filed somewhere polite and forgettable. The kind of idea they admire and quietly ignore. But 3 weeks after he dropped it off, he got an email from the deputy mayor's office. They wanted a meeting. "Just exploratory," Amos said, pacing the living room. "They're not committing to anything." "They don't call meetings for ideas they don't respect," I said. "You think so?" "I know so. Bureaucrats love to say no through email. If they want to say it in person, they're interested." He blinked, like that hadn't occurred to him. That was the thing about growing up in a house where everything you did was met with suspicion. You never learned to recognize your own momentum. I helped him prep. We printed mock-ups, organized notes. I even dug out my old steel-toed boots and shined them, figuring if they wanted to talk about helping rough kids, it wouldn't hurt to show up looking like the man who used to be one. We walked into City Hall that Friday afternoon side by side. Him with his clean button-up and a USB drive full of schematics. Me with a clipboard and a folder labeled Green Shelter Project. There were 5 people waiting in the room. 4 men and 1 woman, mid-50s, gray bob, sharp eyes. She didn't say much at first, just watched. Amos did the talking. He stumbled a little in the beginning. His throat caught when he said the words, formerly unhoused youth. But once he got rolling, you could see it happen. The shift. His back straightened, his voice leveled. He stopped looking at his papers and started looking at them. This isn't about handouts, he said. It's about not letting kids freeze because they've got nowhere else to go. I was that kid. I had a home, technically, but I didn't have a place I was safe. Nobody interrupted. He showed them the trailer sketches, the space-efficient insulation, the solar-powered heaters, the water catch system, everything he'd been drawing and refining in that notebook of his for the past month. When he finished, the woman finally spoke. "Mr. Green," she said, tapping her pen on the table, "you said you were homeless?" "Not legally," Amos said, "but yeah, emotionally, mentally, for about 3 years." She nodded slowly. "And how old are you?" 18. A few of the others exchanged glances. I could tell what they were thinking. Too young, too raw, too personal. But the woman? She just smiled. "Well," she said, "it's rare we get proposals from someone who's not trying to pad a resume." They talked budget, zoning, red tape. Amos kept up. I chimed in once or twice to explain supply chain stuff, building materials, shipping costs, things they didn't teach in engineering textbooks. By the time we walked out, I could see it all over his face. The relief, the adrenaline, the quiet awe of being taken seriously. "They didn't laugh at me," he said in the parking lot. "They wouldn't dare." He chuckled. "I didn't think I could do that." "That's Wilbur talking," I said. "Not you." We stopped for burgers on the way home. The good place out on Highway 10 with the fries that taste like they were cut with a hatchet. And while we ate in the cab of my truck, windows fogged, heater running, Amos looked over at me and said, "Grandpa? Yeah? Can I ask you something hard?" "Always." "Why didn't you come sooner?" I swallowed. That one landed where it was meant to. "I didn't see it," I said finally. "Not clearly. And when I did, I told myself it wasn't my place." "It was," he said. "I know." He nodded. "But you came when it counted." That night, back at the house, I wrote a letter. Not for Wilbur. Not even for Leona. For me. Just a one-page thing I tucked into the Justice. Amos folder. A confession, I guess. I missed the signs. I missed the silence. I thought I was honoring boundaries, but I was just hiding from the truth. That ends now. From this day forward, I show up. I speak. I fight if I have to. And I never again mistake patience for protection. The next morning, Leona called. Amos answered. They talked for 15 minutes. He stood by the window while the kettle boiled, cradling the phone in one hand, rubbing the back of his neck with the other. When he hung up, I didn't ask. He told me anyway. "She told the pastor everything," he said. "Like, everything. About Wilbur. About how she let it happen." "She do it publicly?" He nodded. In front of the congregation. Said she wouldn't accept communion until she earned it. I looked at him. "How do you feel about that?" He thought for a second. Proud. And tired. He went to his room after that. Not to hide, just to rest. And I sat at the kitchen table alone, listening to the quiet tick of the old clock Martha used to wind every Sunday. Tick, tick, the rhythm of a house learning to breathe again. That afternoon we got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a watch. Men's, silver band, simple, elegant. And a note. "Tell Amos I'm sorry. Not for what I did. There's no apology big enough for that. But for what he had to become just to survive it. He earned his time back. F.G. Frank Green." I handed the box to Amos after dinner. He didn't say much, just turned the watch over in his hands like something too delicate to wear yet. But I saw him put it on before bed, left it on the nightstand, ticking softly through the dark. A heartbeat, counted in seconds. toward the life he was building with both hands. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in front of a microphone in a multi-purpose room that smelled like old wood and ambition. The city council had asked for a community voice to speak on behalf of the green shelter proposal. Amos nominated me, said, "You're better with people than I am," which is a lie. The boy could convince a glacier to melt if he looked it in the eye long enough. But I took the honor anyway. I was wearing my good boots, the flannel Martha used to iron for town meetings, and a pair of jeans that didn't sag at the knees. It felt strange. Dressing up not for appearances but for legacy. The chairs were filled with a mix of faces. A few business owners, one social worker, a half-interested man from zoning, and 2 people I hadn't seen since Martha's funeral. They looked at me like I might still be the man who didn't rock the boat, but that version of me was long gone. "I'm not going to read off a list of statistics," I said into the mic. "You already have those." I glanced at Amos in the second row. He nodded, just once, a quiet vote of confidence. "What I will tell you is this. 3 months ago, I found my grandson sitting on a frozen porch in nothing but a t-shirt. His family inside, heat blasting, laughter rolling. A few people shifted in their seats. I used to think things like that happened somewhere else. Some other town, some other kid. But it was our street, our family, and it happened because everyone assumed someone else would notice." I paused. Let the silence settle. That's the trick with truth. You don't need to shout it. Just leave it standing in a room long enough, and it'll speak for itself. "The green shelter won't fix everything," I said, "but it'll mean that the next kid who gets tossed out doesn't freeze waiting for a miracle. It'll mean someone noticed." By the time I finished, the zoning guy had stopped looking at his phone. The social worker was already writing something down. I stepped off the podium feeling taller than I had in years. Outside, Amos clapped me on the back. "You crushed it," he said. "I didn't stutter too much?" "Only when you said miracle. But I think that made it better." That Friday, the city approved the project for a 6-month pilot. 1 trailer, 1 neighborhood, full backing. The local paper ran a story on Sunday. "Shelter from within. Grandfather and grandson team, up to keep kids warm." They didn't get all the facts right. Called me a retired civic leader. Called Amos an aspiring engineer. Which wasn't wrong, but missed the point. Still, it was enough to make Wilbur's silence even louder. He hadn't shown up in weeks. No more drive-bys, no voicemails, nothing. But we heard whispers. He'd tried to move in with his sister. She'd refused. Tried getting reinstated at work. They declined. Tried finding a lawyer to clear his name. No one would touch the case. There's something poetic about a man who built his life on control, watching everything slip through fingers that used to be fists. Amos didn't ask about him anymore. He didn't need to. He was too busy. Between work at the auto shop and weekly meetings with the shelter build team, the kid had a schedule I could barely keep up with. And I liked it that way. Busy hands leave less space for ghosts. One night, after dinner, he pulled out a flyer and handed it to me. "Talent shows next weekend. You still coming?" "Wouldn't miss it." He grinned. "We're doing a cover of Simple Man. Jake says I sound more like Eddie Vedder than Lynyrd Skynyrd, but I think it works." "I'm sure it does." He looked at me. "Can I ask you something kind of weird?" "Go ahead." "You think Grandma knows about all this?" I thought about that for a while. About Martha. Her notebooks, her letters, her quiet warnings, and even quieter strength. "I think she's the one who kept the porch light on," I said. "Just long enough for you to find your way back." He nodded, eyes glassy. We stood up to clean the kitchen then. Amos took the plates. I rinsed. We moved around each other like old dance partners. And as I wiped down the counter, I realized something simple. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about return. Not just Amos, but me. To a version of myself that knew when to act, when to protect, when to stop waiting for someone else to do the right thing. The next morning, Leona came by again. This time, she brought a pan of lasagna, homemade, from scratch. The way Martha used to make it. No apologies, no big talk, just food, shared, left on the counter like a peace treaty signed in marinara. Amos ate 3 helpings. Afterward, I went to the garage, opened the folder one last time, the emails, the statements, the photos, the letter from Martha, the apology from Frank, the watch, the truth. I didn't throw it out, but I moved it to a cabinet. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was history, and we had better things to build now. We didn't hear from Wilbur again until spring. It was one of those rare April afternoons where the whole world feels like it's just been washed. The sidewalks clean, the air sharp with tulips and earthworms, the kind of day Martha would have called a day worth hanging the laundry. Amos and I had just come back from the lumberyard. We'd picked up reclaimed boards for the first green shelter build, a test unit they were assembling in a volunteer's backyard until the trailer arrived. It was slow work, honest work, the kind of work that makes you tired in a good way. We were unloading planks when my phone buzzed. Blocked number. Again. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. Answer it, Amos said. Might be someone real. So I did. Dennis, came the voice. Dry, brittle, used to being ignored. It's Wilbur. I held the phone away from my face like it had started to smell. He didn't wait for me to speak. I'm not calling to fight or threaten. I know how that went last time. I'm calling because I heard about the shelter. And I thought, well, maybe I could help. I laughed. Loud. The kind of sound that echoes off truck beds. You think you're qualified to help homeless kids? He didn't take the bait. I've been going to meetings, anger stuff. There's a guy there who says change starts with service. And I thought maybe if I helped build something. No, I said, flat, final. He went quiet for a second. I figured, but I had to try. You didn't try, I said. Not when it counted. Then I hung up. Amos didn't ask who it was. He didn't have to. He just kept unloading boards, whistling under his breath. That was the thing about moving forward. You don't have to outrun the past. You just have to stop letting it ride shotgun. The next week, the city delivered the trailer. It was smaller than I expected, just 20 feet, single axle, unassuming. But it gleamed. Inside, it smelled like plywood and purpose. Amos stood in the doorway with a clipboard, checking off items, insulation, paneling, heat lamp mounts, charging station wiring. You sure you're only 18? I asked. He grinned. I've been 18 for 3 years. It was true in ways I couldn't begin to unpack. Jake showed up with his dad and a few tools. Others followed. A high school shop teacher, a retired contractor, 2 guys from the shelter board who looked more comfortable in loafers than work boots, but showed up anyway. We worked for hours, and by the end of the day, we had walls, real ones. Amos stood inside the frame as the sun set, looking around like he was measuring a future. That corner there, he said, pointing. I want a mural, something painted by the kids who use it, so they know they're not just passing through. What kind of mural? Doesn't matter, just as long as it's theirs. That night, I drove past Leona's house for the first time since Thanksgiving. The porch had been cleared, new curtains, the wreath was gone, no sign of Wilbur anywhere. I didn't stop, just circled the block once and drove on. Later, back home, I found Amos sketching again. This time it wasn't a shelter, it was a house. Not ours, not his mother's, something new. He closed the notebook when I walked in. Just an idea, he said. Ideas make the world, I told him. Don't let anyone talk you out of dreaming. You didn't, he said. No, I said. But I almost did. He nodded. Yeah, me too. We sat on the porch for a while after that, wrapped in blankets, coffee mugs warm in our hands. The kind of quiet that doesn't need words. I might go back to Dayton next semester, he said. You should. But I want to stay involved with the shelter. Maybe start a program on campus, student-led stuff, you know, bridge the gap. I smiled. Look at you, building bridges already. He shrugged. Someone has to. I raised my mug in a small toast. To the bridge builders, then. We clinked cups, and under the porch light, the same one that had stayed on through so many storms, we sat until the stars came out. Not talking about Wilbur, not counting bruises, not remembering the cold, just two men sitting in the warmth they'd built themselves. The shelter made the news again. Not just the lifestyle section this time, front page, above the fold. Green shelter opens pilot location, led by local teen with a past. The photo showed Amos in his work gloves, 1 foot on a step stool, power drill in hand, a smudge of paint on his cheek. You couldn't tell from the picture, but he'd been up since 5 that morning troubleshooting an issue with the solar wiring. He looked calm, capable, like someone who'd been building more than walls. The article was kind, careful. It talked about overcoming adversity, about youth-led solutions, about a community learning from its failures. They didn't mention Wilbur by name, but he was there, between the lines, in every phrase about neglect, in every reference to cold nights and unreported bruises. I watched Amos read it over breakfast, mouth twitching into something halfway between pride and disbelief. "You think they'll be mad?" he asked, setting the paper down. "Her side of the family?" "Maybe," I said, "but the truth makes people uncomfortable. That's how you know it's working." The phone started ringing again that week. Not the kind of calls that used to come in, the crisis ones, the begging, the half-accusations. These were different. A teacher from Amos's old high school called to invite him to speak to the shop class. A youth center director asked if he'd be interested in hosting a workshop. One woman, a caseworker from 3 counties over, asked for his permission to share his story in a grant application. "They want a poster boy," he said one night, thumbing through his messages. "No," I said. "They want someone who's walked through fire and didn't come out a ghost." He sat with that for a minute, then nodded. He agreed to a few things, not everything. He was careful, still learning the difference between being useful and being used. Leona showed up to the shelter build site the next Saturday, not in heels or pearls, but jeans and an old college sweatshirt. She brought sandwiches, didn't ask to be in photos, didn't fuss, just put on gloves and held boards steady while Amos drilled. They didn't talk much, but he let her hand him the screws. Progress. That night I found a letter in the mailbox, no stamp, just dropped off. It was folded once, in careful thirds. "Dennis, I thought I had control. For years I told myself I was shaping a boy into a man, but all I did was break things I didn't build. I've lost everything now, and maybe that's the justice you were after. But I don't blame you. I blame the silence I mistook for peace. Tell Amos I won't come near him again. Not without permission. Not ever. That's the one line I won't cross again. And thank you for not letting me win. WG." I didn't show it to Amos, not yet. Some letters aren't meant for the wounded. They're meant for the ones who held the line. Instead, I tucked it in the back of the folder. No label, no index tab. Just proof that silence can end, even if it takes a wrecking ball to do it. 2 days later, Amos spoke at the high school. I sat in the back of the room, next to the shop teacher. Kids slouched in metal chairs, chewing gum and checking phones. Typical crowd. But when Amos started talking, really talking, they straightened up. "I was 17 when I started believing I deserved the cold," he said. "When I thought discipline meant silence. That's what happens when you grow up under someone who confuses control with care." He paused, looked out over the room like he was still deciding whether to keep going. Then he did. "But it doesn't have to stay that way. You don't have to wait for someone to fix you. You can start where you are, with what you have." He held up a photo of the trailer, just a frame then, a promise. That's what we built. Not because we're heroes, but because nobody came for us when we needed it, and we didn't want that to happen to someone else. A kid in the front row raised his hand. Did you forgive the guy? Amos didn't answer right away. I don't know, he said, but I forgave myself for staying quiet so long. That's where it starts. The teacher clapped first, then the room followed. Not the hollow kind, real clapping, slow, heavy. On the drive home, I didn't say much. I just let the silence speak for him. That night we finished the first trailer, every wall painted, every bolt tightened. Amos stood at the door, hand on the handle. His initials carved into the back of the entry step, small and careful. This feels like the end, he said. No, I told him. This feels like Chapter 2. The trailer's official ribbon cutting took place on a sunny afternoon in May. The mayor showed up, a local news anchor. Someone from the fire department stood off to the side in full dress blues, even though it wasn't that kind of event. The paper sent a younger reporter this time, bright eyes, not jaded yet, and she asked good questions. Not just about specs and budget, but about dignity, about why it took a kid to see what the rest of the city had missed. Amos didn't speak much. He didn't need to. The trailer spoke for him. One clean door, 2 bunks, a heater that worked, a charging station, hooks for coats. A little shelf where someone had already left a book of poetry and a granola bar. Simple, beautiful. There was a mural on the back wall now, started by a kid from the rec center, finished by Amos. Bright oranges and blues, silhouettes of people helping each other up. No faces, just hands, reaching, holding, catching. Leona was there. She stood with a plate of cookies in one hand and a stack of flyers in the other. Her hair was tied back, no jewelry. She didn't try to stand near Amos, just stayed on the sidelines watching. After the crowd thinned out, I noticed her walking toward him. He didn't flinch. They stood under the awning and talked for maybe 10 minutes. She didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. Just 2 people exchanging the truth quietly, like something sacred passed between them. When she walked away, Amos stood there alone for a while. Then he turned, walked to the truck, and opened the door. You okay? I asked. He nodded. She said sorry. For real this time. Did you believe her? He sat with the question. Yeah, he said. I think I did. We drove home with the windows down. The next week, Amos got a letter from Dayton University. Full admission. Credits from his previous semesters reinstated. And maybe the biggest miracle, a housing grant. One of the city council members had made a few calls after the shelter story ran. They'd found supplemental assistance for at-risk youth demonstrating community leadership. I watched him read the letter at the kitchen table, eyes moving slow across the page like he was trying not to spook it. Like if he blinked, it might disappear. You going? I asked. He looked up. Do you want me to? Don't ask me that, I said. Ask yourself. He didn't answer right away. That weekend he drove up to the lake alone. Just him, a tent, and a cooler full of sandwiches. Said he needed space to think. I understood. Some decisions need wind and water to be made properly. He came back Sunday evening, sunburned and quiet. I'm going, he said. Good. But I want to leave the shelter project in place. Local volunteers. A board. I want it to last without me. I'll help. I know. We spent the next few weeks preparing, not just for college, but for departure. We built a new shelf in the garage, cleaned out the guest room he'd been using, sorted through his notebooks, cataloged his designs, scanned everything digital, and archived it twice. The house started feeling bigger again. Not emptier exactly. Just less full of need. One afternoon, while we were labeling boxes, Amos said, I used to think leaving meant quitting, like I was giving up on fixing things. And now? I think it just means letting go. I nodded. There's power in that. The day before he left, we went fishing. Same lake, same spot. Didn't catch a damn thing. But we sat on the dock, passing a bag of pretzels back and forth, watching the water ripple around the boat cleats. "Grandpa," he said, after a long silence, "you know what I'm scared of?" I shook my head. That I'll go back to trying to be small. That in a new place, I'll forget I'm allowed to take up space now. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "Then don't forget. You earned every inch." He nodded, but his eyes were wet. We drove home in silence. Not the heavy kind. The kind you earn. That night, I stayed up late. After he went to bed, I pulled out one last envelope. A copy of Martha's letter, the one she'd written for me years ago. The one I'd kept hidden in the folder all this time. I added a note of my own. "Amos, if you ever forget who you are, read this. It's from the woman who loved you before you could walk, and the man who watched you stand back up when no one else believed you could. The world will try to shrink you. Don't let it. Love, Grandpa." I slipped it into his backpack, between his laptop and his sketch pad. Next morning, I watched him drive off. Truck packed, windows clean, future wide open. Didn't wave, didn't cry, just stood there under the porch light, still on, still waiting, but not for someone to come home anymore, for someone to rise. The house was quieter after Amos left, not hollow, just different. The way a tool bench feels after you've finished building something that mattered, a certain kind of stillness, like the space itself is catching its breath. I didn't rush to fill the silence, didn't rearrange the guest room, didn't box up the guitar he left propped in the corner or erase his name from the Wi-Fi. I let the house be what it was, the place he'd rebuilt himself. He called the second night. Short call, just checking in. Said the dorm was smaller than he expected. His roommate was fine, a little loud, obsessed with lifting, nothing serious. I asked if he'd unpacked. He laughed. "Mostly, except for one envelope I found at the bottom of my bag." "Yeah?" I said. "Yeah, Grandma's letter. And yours." His voice got quiet. I read it 3 times. That was all he needed to say. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a new rhythm. He'd call every Sunday evening. Never scheduled, but always came. Usually right after he'd finished homework and before he remembered to eat dinner. Sometimes we talked about classes, sometimes about politics, sometimes just about guitar strings and cafeteria food. But always at some point he'd ask, "How's the shelter?" And every time I'd have something new to tell him, because the shelter wasn't just running, it was growing. After the pilot site proved successful, no incidents, no loitering complaints, nothing but 3 grateful kids and 1 emergency heater repair, the city greenlit a second trailer. We set it up near the library downtown. The volunteers handled the build-out. I handled the logistics. Leona, believe it or not, took on community partnerships. She brought in churches, grocery stores. A local bank even sponsored monthly maintenance costs. One Sunday night, Amos called just as I was sitting down with a bowl of leftover chili. "You busy?" he asked. "Always." "Good. I need your opinion on something." He emailed over a design, a modified shelter layout, built-in shelves, foldable desks, charging ports with timers, designed not just for sleeping, but studying. "What if they're not just safe?" he asked. "What if we help them build futures while they're there?" "Then you're aiming high," I said, "which is exactly what you should be doing." He didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear him breathing on the line, steady. "Sometimes I still hear his voice," he said finally. "Wilbur, in my head, criticizing, undermining." "I know," I said. "That's what happens when someone like him rents space in your brain for too long. They don't always move out right away." "What do you do?" I answer back. He chuckled. "That easy?" "No," I said, "but it's the work." A few days later, I received a thick envelope from Dayton. Inside, a copy of Amos's first published op-ed from the student paper. Home isn't just a roof, it's the right to belong. He didn't pull punches. Wrote about the trauma, about the cold, about the power of one person showing up when no one else would. He changed my name, called me my grandfather, D. But I knew who he meant. The piece went viral, at least in small circles. The school reposted it. The city of Dayton reached out about partnering on a local shelter initiative. By the time the semester was half over, Amos had more requests for interviews than he could handle. "Feels weird," he said one Sunday. "Telling my story like it's a lesson plan." "It is," I said, "just not the kind they teach in classrooms." One night, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea and looked out across the yard. I thought about Wilbur. Last I'd heard, he was living in a rented room above a bar in Yakima. No job, no visitors, no legacy. Part of me wondered if he read the op-ed, if he saw the shelters, if he understood what he'd built. Not the suffering, but the reaction to it, the resistance. It didn't matter, because this wasn't about him anymore. This was about Amos, about what happens when someone survives the worst of you and chooses not to become it. 1 week before Thanksgiving, I got a text. "Coming home Friday. Can I bring someone with me?" "Who?" I asked. "A friend. She's in the social work program. We've been talking." "Talking?" I wrote. "Or talking. "Shut up," he texted back. "I'll bring pie." He came home with a girl named Maya. Bright eyes, smart questions. Didn't fidget when I grilled her about her coursework. She helped set the table, knew how to carve a turkey, called me Mr. Burke, even when I told her not to. After dinner, Amos and I stepped outside for a moment. Porch light still on. Cold, starting to settle in. "She seems like a good one," I said. "She is," he said. "Different." "Different good?" "Different right." We stood there a while, watching the lights from the neighbor's house flicker through the trees. "Thanks for keeping the light on," he said. "Always." He went back inside. I stayed a little longer, porch light glowing, wind soft, and for the first time since that bitter Thanksgiving when everything broke apart, I realized we weren't just healing. We were building something stronger than before, because the truth is, families fall. But if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, they also rise. The snow came late that year. It held off through December, just cold wind and gray skies, until the day before Christmas Eve, when flakes started falling like someone had shaken loose a memory. I'd just finished clearing out the garage, again, when Amos called. He and Maya were staying in town for the holidays. Her parents had invited them over for Christmas dinner, but he wanted to spend Christmas morning here. Said, "It doesn't feel right waking up anywhere else." That hit me harder than I let on. I just said, "You know where the key is," even though he didn't need it anymore. He had his own now. He came by that night, just as the snow really started to come down. His truck looked older, salt-streaked, but it ran smooth. He stepped out wearing a scarf I didn't recognize and a look I did. Steady, rooted, not a boy visiting home, a man returning to it. We sat by the fireplace after dinner. Same spot we used to sit after those awful days when everything was breaking and we didn't know where it would land. Maya was upstairs on a video call with her brother. Leona had dropped off a pie that morning and hadn't lingered. We were finding our rhythm again. No guilt, no pressure. Just people making peace at a sustainable pace. Amos stirred his tea and said, "I had a dream about the steps." "The porch?" "No, the ones at Mom's, where I sat that day." I waited. I was sitting there, but it wasn't snowing. It was summer, warm, and I wasn't scared. I was just waiting. Waiting for what? He smiled. "For you to show up." I did. "Yeah, you did." We sat in silence, the kind that only comes when everything important has already been said and there's nothing left to prove. "You know what's strange?" he said. "Sometimes I still think about what would have happened if you hadn't come." I try not to. I don't mean in a regret way. I mean, I think about the version of me that would have come out of that. The one who kept quiet, who shrank, who maybe never got out. You're not that version. I know, he said, but I think about him sometimes. Like I owe him something. Like I owe you. You don't, I said. You owe yourself. That's the only debt worth paying. He nodded. The snow piled against the windows. The fire popped and hissed. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. Early gift. Inside was a simple photo, printed on glossy stock. The trailer, painted, lit. 2 kids sitting inside on the edge of one of the bunks, both wrapped in donated blankets, grinning like they'd just won the lottery. Amos took the photo. "I met them last week," he said. "Brother and sister, 12 and 9. Mom works nights and the shelter near their place shut down. They'd been crashing on a neighbor's couch. They warm now? Warm and registered for school next semester. We got them into a transitional program." I looked at the photo again. Then again. They weren't posing. They weren't putting on smiles for a camera. They were at ease. Safe. "You did that," I said. He didn't answer. Just sipped his tea and let the fire fill the room with soft light. Later that night, I went out to the porch, snow still falling. A hush over everything, the kind of quiet that makes the world feel like a secret kept just for you. I left the light on. Old habits. But this time, I wasn't leaving it on for someone lost or afraid or half frozen in shame. I was leaving it on for the next one, whoever they were, wherever they were. Because the real ending to this story, the real justice, isn't that Wilbur vanished. It isn't that Amos escaped. It's that now, when the next kid sits on some cold step in some quiet suburb wondering if they're worth saving, there's a place, a light, a shelter built not from guilt, but from truth, and a young man who knows, without question, that he was never the problem. He was always the blueprint. Spring returned like it always does, not all at once, but in hints. A bud on the dogwood, the creak of old soil thawing. A robin pulling worms from the side of the road like nothing terrible had ever happened anywhere. Amos came home again that March, not because he had to, just because he wanted to. He didn't knock, just let himself in and called out, "You make coffee or should I start the pot?" That's how I knew we were really healed. He sat at the kitchen table, thumbing through the mail while I got the mugs. "Got an email from a foundation in Cincinnati," he said. "They want to sponsor 3 more shelters. Want to pilot the mural program too. You say yes?" "Of course." He slid a flyer across the table, one of the new ones they'd made. Polished, professional, Green Shelters Initiative. Because no one should be left outside. Below the headline was a black and white photo of Amos in the original trailer, the one he'd built. The one he'd once imagined while sitting in a garage that locked from the outside. It hit me then, how far he'd come. Not just miles. Years. Versions of himself shed like winter coats too small for the man he'd become. "Still hear from Maya?" I asked. He nodded. "We talk every few days. She's interning with the Child Advocacy Office in Columbus." "Good for her." He sipped his coffee and looked around the kitchen like he was checking if anything had changed. "Sometimes I miss being here," he said. "Not just the house, the quiet, the porch light. It's always on." "I know." We walked the yard later that afternoon. The ground was still too cold to turn, but I showed him where I was planning to rebuild Martha's garden beds. He knelt down near the edge of the fence, running his fingers through a patch of earth still frozen underneath. "You ever think about what you would have done if I hadn't come with you that day?" he asked. "If I'd stayed frozen on those steps?" "Yeah," I said. "Every damn day. And I would have waited, then come back, again and again, until you got in that truck." He nodded, and I saw it again. That flicker of something deep behind the eyes. Not fear anymore, something harder to name. Gratitude, maybe, or the ache of knowing just how close we'd come to losing everything. That night, we grilled steaks on the back porch, just like Martha used to do in early spring when she couldn't wait for the weather to catch up to her mood. After dinner, Amos pulled a folder from his backpack. "I've been working on something," he said. "Maya helped." It was a proposal, 30 pages long, diagrams, case studies, a full plan to expand the shelter model statewide. Community-led teams, modular units, education pathways for residents, and a small note in the back. "In memory of the silence that tried to break us, for everyone who ever thought they were too invisible to matter." I read it 3 times. "You ready for this?" I asked. "No," he said, "but I'm going anyway." We didn't say much else that night. He left the next morning, after pancakes and one final cup of coffee. "Take care of the porch," he said, tossing his bag over his shoulder. "Always." "And the light. You don't even have to ask." He smiled and walked out the door. I stood there a while, watching the tail lights fade down the street. That ache in my chest. The kind that's not pain, just proof that something once mattered and still does. I didn't feel worried. Didn't feel the old protective instinct either. Because I knew he was protected now, not by me, but by something better. Purpose, conviction, the kind of peace you only earn by walking through fire and coming out honest. Back inside, the house felt still, but not empty. Just quiet, settled. The phone rang around noon. It was the church down the road. Someone asking if I'd be willing to speak at a youth mentorship breakfast next month. "I'm not much of a public speaker," I said. "We heard what you did for your grandson," the woman said. "You don't have to speak. Just be there." "I can do that." So I said yes. And when I hung up, I looked out the window at the backyard we'd rebuilt. The snow was gone now, earth dark and damp. Ready, like us. April passed quiet. I planted the garden beds with Leona's help, tomatoes, bell peppers, that heirloom squash Martha always swore by. Amos wasn't around to help this year, and strangely, that felt right. Not like absence, but evolution. Like he'd grown past needing to be nearby for the roots to hold. He called every Sunday, though, like clockwork. Sometimes it was from a gas station on the way back from a speaking engagement. Sometimes from a cramped dorm room with textbooks piled on the bed behind him. Once, I caught him in the passenger seat of a van full of volunteers, laughing so hard he couldn't even say hello. And once, just once, he called while walking through a shelter in Dayton. Live. Camera pointed down the hallway, showing new coats lined on a wall, a bulletin board of art, and a girl maybe 10 years old holding a paper that said, "This is the first time I've been warm for 3 days in a row." He didn't say much that call. Just let the moment speak for itself. He visited again in May, alone this time. Maya was working a summer internship in Cleveland. He had a few weeks before his next speaking engagement, and he wanted dirt under his nails, as he put it. So we worked, built a new tool shed behind the garage, repaired a cracked section of the back fence, rewired the porch light together, the one that had never quite turned on unless you jiggled the switch just right. Now it glowed steady. On his last night home, he brought something down from his room, a box. "I think it's time you had this," he said. Inside were the pages from his old notebooks, shelter sketches, mural drafts, early copies of the proposal. Even the original drawing he'd done the night he told me about the idea, the first time he let himself believe he could build something that mattered. He placed the box on the mantel. "You don't want to take it with you?" I asked. "I've got what I need." I reached inside and pulled out one sheet at random, a floor plan, dated, smudged, folded twice. "You know," I said, "Martha would have laminated every one of these." "I know," he said. "She would have color-coded them too." We laughed, but it landed soft, gentle. Later, we sat on the porch with the light on behind us. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how all this started." I nodded. "That porch. That cold." "No, I mean before that. The real start." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "It started the moment you stopped believing I'd be okay without help. When you stopped waiting for permission and just showed up." "I didn't feel brave," I said. "You were." We sat there until the air cooled and the cicadas took over the quiet. Before bed, he left a note on the fridge. "Grandpa, I'm not coming back for a while. You know that, but I want you to know I carry you with me. You didn't just save me, you taught me what home really means. Tell the garden I'll see it in bloom. Love, A." In the morning, I found his mug rinsed and drying by the sink, his boots gone from the mat by the door, but the porch light still worked. That summer I sat in his chair most nights, read the paper, listened to the distant buzz of life going on. Sometimes neighbors would walk by and nod. One of them, a teenager I barely knew, stopped one evening and said, "That shelter thing? That was your grandson, right?" I nodded. "Sheesh," he said, almost reverent. "That was cool." And then he walked on, earbuds in, back to his world. But I sat with that for a long while, not because I needed praise, because that one word, cool, held the kind of weight I never expected. Amos wasn't just safe, he was relevant, seen, not because of what had been done to him, but because of what he'd chosen to do next. Late August brought the first gold in the trees. You don't notice it at first, the way summer loosens its grip, until you find a leaf on the windshield, or the air smells a little like pencils and change. I'd started writing again. Nothing big, just entries, observations. I kept a small notebook by the back window and filled it with the little things Amos didn't have time to notice anymore, like how the tomatoes were ripening faster this year, how the mourning doves returned to the fence line like they owned the place, how quiet the porch stayed, even when the neighborhood got loud. One morning, I woke up to an envelope on the porch. No postage, just tucked between the door and the frame like a secret. Inside was a photo, grainy, black and white. Looked like it came from a public record archive. Wilbur, younger, maybe late 20s. Standing beside a younger Leona who was smiling like she hadn't yet learned not to. Behind them, barely visible, was a boy. Arms folded, eyes down, already learning how to disappear. There was no note, just that image. A piece of history no one asked for, and yet, part of the story. I didn't show it to Amos. Some ghosts don't need to be named. Instead, I added it to the folder one last time. I'd kept the Justice Amos folder all this time, even though the fight was long over. But that morning I realized I didn't need it anymore. Not because the past had healed, but because it had finally been seen. I bundled the papers, every photo, every letter, every court printout. I didn't burn it, that felt too final, but I did seal it, put it in a box, stored it up in the attic, alongside Martha's recipes and Amos's childhood artwork. It wasn't my weight to carry anymore. Just a story to keep. 2 weeks later, I got a package from Dayton, a plaque, presented to Dennis Burke for your unwavering commitment to truth, family, and the right to be seen. The letter inside was from the Dean of Students. Apparently Amos had mentioned me during a speech, said I was the hinge that turned the door, whatever that meant. I placed the plaque above the mantel, next to our fishing photo, next to Martha's last letter, and the drawing Amos had made of the very first shelter. It looked right there, not because it was shiny, but because it was earned. Fall came quickly after that. The house started to feel small again, but not in a sad way, in the way a good book feels small when you reach the last few pages. One evening, Leona came by with a box of canning jars and a bag of apples. "I thought we could make something," she said, "like old times." We peeled and boiled and stirred, and the kitchen filled with the smell of sugar and cinnamon. I'd forgotten how easy it was to fall into rhythm with someone who shared your blood, even when history tried its best to poison it. At one point she paused, hands sticky, and said, "You were right about him, about Wilbur, about me." I didn't say anything. She reached for the next apple. "Thank you for not giving up." "I thought about it," I said. She smiled. "But you didn't." We filled 6 jars, wrote labels. She took 3, left 3. The porch light clicked on automatically as she walked to her car. She stopped at the end of the drive, turned, and waved. That was the thing no one talks about with healing, how small it looks from the outside. Not confetti, not parades, just jars on a shelf, and silence where pain used to live. A week later, I received a letter from Amos, typed, not handwritten. He was busy after all. "Grandpa, we're launching the new site in Columbus next month, 5 shelters in the first phase. Maya's moving there with me. We signed the lease yesterday. I want you to come out for the ceremony. We're dedicating the site, not to me, not to the program, to you. Because you showed up when I didn't even know how to ask for help. Because you taught me that protection isn't about shouting, it's about staying. Because you knew the cost of silence and paid the price anyway. I wouldn't be here without you. With love, Amos." I read it twice. Then I walked out to the porch, sat in the chair he'd once called his, and watched the sun fall behind the trees. A few neighborhood kids rode past on bikes. One of them, a boy maybe 13, waved and shouted, "Hey, Mr. Burke!" "Hey!" I called back. Then I looked up at the light above the door. Still on, still steady, still waiting. But no longer for someone broken. Now it waited for someone ready. The morning of the dedication, I dressed slow. Not because I was tired, though my knees complained like they always do in the fall, but because I knew once I put on that jacket, once I laced those boots, once I stepped outside, the story would close itself behind me like a well-oiled door. I caught the early bus to Columbus. Amos had offered to drive me up himself, but I wanted the space. Something about a long ride through changing trees and unfamiliar towns felt right. Gave me time to think, to remember. Martha would have made a fuss about the tie I chose, probably would have picked something less faded. But I wore the one she gave me on our anniversary, navy with thin silver lines. Amos had seen it in every important picture from my life. Now it was his turn. The new site sat on a lot that used to be a scrapyard. You'd never know it. Now there were raised garden beds, solar lights, bright paint on every surface, 5 trailers, all lined up like quiet sentinels, all connected by wooden walkways Amos designed himself. He met me at the entrance. No clipboard, no speech in hand, just him. He hugged me, tight, long. "Glad you came," he said. "Wouldn't miss it." The ceremony wasn't flashy, just a few folding chairs. Local press. The mayor again, new one this time, younger. Smiled like someone who'd never frozen on a porch in their life, but still meant well. Amos gave a short speech. Spoke about community. About what it means to create safety, not just provide shelter. Then he motioned me forward. "None of this," he said, voice carrying over the quiet crowd, "would exist without the man who taught me what love looks like when it shows up anyway." I stood beside him while they unveiled the plaque. It was small, bronze. Simple. Mounted beside the main entrance. The Burke House named for the man who came back. For the porch light that never went out. I couldn't speak. Not there. Not with that many people watching. But I reached out and laid my palm flat against it, warm from the sun, steady, real. Later, after the crowd had thinned and the volunteers had returned to work, Amos and I sat on the back step of the farthest trailer. He pulled something from his coat, a small box. Inside, a brass key. "Your name's on the lease," he said. "1 trailer, 1 room, whenever you want it." "I've got a place," I said. "I know," he said, "but now you've got 2. We sat there a while, drinking water from paper cups, watching kids from the neighborhood come check out the new mural wall. I saw one girl trace her name into the chalkboard paint. Just 6 letters. But you could see what it meant. To leave a mark. To be seen. Eventually, I stood up. It was time. He walked me to the bus stop. No big goodbye. Just, "I'll call Sunday?" "You better." He laughed. "You ever think we'd end up here?" "No," I said. "But I always hoped we would." On the ride home, I watched the trees roll past, gold turning to fire. People got on, got off. The world kept moving. I held that brass key in my hand the whole way. Didn't need it, but I liked the weight. When I got home, the porch light had clicked on by itself. New wiring. Works on a sensor now. Amos installed it last year, quietly, like a son fixing something that always deserved better. I stood there under it a while, not because I was waiting, because I was remembering. And then I went inside, hung the key on a nail beside the door. Right under the photo of him from the dedication, right where I could see it. Some nights I still sit on that porch, not to mourn, not to hope, just to notice. The way a man notices the harvest, the way he recognizes the sound of something good growing, the kind of peace that comes not from forgetting what happened, but from knowing it mattered. And now someone else is safe. Because of it. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it, or leave a comment. Let us know where you're listening from. And as always, keep your porch light on. You never know who's trying to find their way home. The end.